Hello, everyone. We want to take this opportunity to say thank you. As you grow at the Golden Boot, so do our needs, but we cannot do it without you. We ask that you continue to like our posts, share our content, and subscribe to our YouTube, Facebook, and other social media platforms. You may also visit thegoldenboot.com for the latest merch. If you would like to make a financial donation, you can do so through Cash App at @Golden Boot or through PayPal at paypal.me/Golden Boot. We look forward to bringing you more laughs, knowledge, and entertainment. And again, thank you for your endless support. Sincerely and respectfully, the Golden Boot team.
The views and opinions expressed in the Golden Boot podcast are those of the speaker and do not necessarily reflect the views or positions of the Golden Boot podcast as a whole.
Y'all ready to get rolling? Quiet on the set. Hey, welcome back to another episode of HBCU Hour. It's your boy Pooh Bear. I got my man Aunt Petty Murphy in the building. First off, Aunt, welcome back. 2 days later. Since Monday, it feel like it's been about 8 days.
It feel like it's been a minute. Yeah,
it's been a long 2 days. A lot has happened. We're gonna jump into it. We do have a special guest with us this evening. We got the Dr. Kenyatta Cavil. Depending on what, as he told us last time, depending on what part of the family, it could be Cavil. But it's Cavil. But we do want to touch on a few other things before we get into main topic for tonight. Aunt,
what's good?
Have you ever been able to take a high profile job and then go back to your regular job?
No. I worked 2 jobs at once, you know what I mean? But I ain't never had like a premier job and then, another, good job, but just not as, prolific.
Right. Well, Alabama A&M's offensive coordinator, Dwayne Taylor, will be working double duty. He is going to be an offensive coordinator for the Vegas Vipers. He's also going to be able to go back to Alabama A&M and continue to be offensive coordinator with Coach Maynard. We've been talking about, especially now with everything going on, building those coaching trees. Having those coaches who, in HBCU who can spread out, make a name for themselves and go elsewhere and do big things. So this is big. I think it's, first of all, kudos to Coach Maynard for allowing this and signing off on this. And also for Dwayne Taylor getting this opportunity to do well. I think Vegas just got a new fan. So
let me ask you this. Does he bring a kid glass with him?
Ooh. He'd be a fool not to at least try.
Yeah. Like, that's, to me, when I first saw that, I don't know if Akil's with anybody currently on a roster right now, but just the thought of possibly reuniting them two together, man, that'd be fun in Vegas for sure.
Yeah. I'd love to see it. But first off, let me do this. Let me not be rude. Let me say thank you. Thank you to everyone for tuning in. We truly appreciate your support. Don't forget to subscribe, like, share. If you have any questions, comments, feel free to drop them in the chat. As we say all the time, you could be anywhere in the world, but you're here with us, and we appreciate that. What's good, Jason Brumfield? We got Chuck in the building. Our good man, Chuck Hunt, the encyclopedia.
Yes, sir, my boy.
But let's touch on basketball real quick, Ant.
All right.
North Carolina Central had a game with Maryland Eastern
Maryland.
Shore that did not look like it was gonna be.
I thought the game was over. I mean,
Yeah.
and on Twitter, you could see people who, when they saw the end result of the game, it was oh, dang, I shouldn't have left. A lot of people thought the game was over. Central was up 13 and a half.
Yeah.
I think they were, 7 with 51 seconds left in the game, and somehow ended up losing the game. Maryland Eastern Shore took the lead on the last play of the game, and that's all she wrote.
Let's check out that last play.
You don't know who's in.
Hey, that's crazy. What a play.
That's why you got to play all 40 minutes, man.
Yeah. I think I told y'all the story about it was Eastern Carolina versus Marshall in the back then it was the GMAC Bowl in Mobile. We left, me and my cousin and one of our school friends were at the game. We left the game 3 times.
You talking about that?
Yeah, left the game because it literally where the stadium sits is not far from our house. Our uncle went with us, so we left, dropped him off, went back to the game. It was a blowout. They were losing Marshall was losing by 28 or 21, something like that. We left, dropped him off, went back to the game because that's what high school students do. The game started getting closer. It started being, instead of 28, 21 points, it was 14 points. We left again, went home. They took it to overtime and triple overtime. Marshall ended up winning. That was old Byron Leftwich versus David Broad back in those days. So, speaking of basketball, it's a lot of big matchups this weekend in the SWAC.
Yeah, you got probably one of, if not the biggest matchup of the season in Southern Alcorn facing off. That game should be packed, and that should be a great game. But I mean, you got both conferences, the SWAC and the MEAC. They both kind of top heavy, crowded at the top. You got Alcorn and Southern both with 1 loss. Grambling got 2 losses. I think Prairie View got 2 losses, I believe. So you got a bunch of teams. Jackson State got 2 losses. UAPB got 3 losses. So yeah, you got a few teams that stacked out right there within 1 or 2 games of each other. And the MEAC is just as close at the top with a couple teams with 1 loss, with Maryland Eastern Shore, Howard, and Morgan State all have 1 loss, and you got 2 teams with 2 losses. So it's gonna be a tight race down the stretch run of conference play. So should get some good basketball out of it.
Gotcha. Quick question for you. I know we talked in the beginning preseason who we thought would be, basketball wise. Actually, it's ironically, I think Dr. Cavil was on when we picked this, who we thought would be the win in basketball. I know we were saying Texas Southern. Maybe we should just say Southern. Southern is
and it's crazy because Johnny Jones usually have a great program. You know what I mean?
Right.
He usually the leading team in the SWAC. So it just looked like a down year for them. But the SWAC has been very competitive also. So you can't take that. You got to take that into consideration.
Right. All right. Let's go ahead without any further ado and bring up Dr. Cavil. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome back to the Golden Boot. Dr. Cavil, hosting Inside the Sports Cloud with Dr. Cavil. Did I get that wrong? I think did I mess that up, Dr. Cavil?
No, you said it right, Dr. Cavil.
No, I'm talking about the Inside the Sports Lab.
Inside the HBCU Sports Lab.
Inside the HBCU Sports Lab, yes. Welcome back, Dr. Cavil. How are you doing this evening?
I'm good. It's good to be back. I saw that intro picture. I forgot that picture. I like that.
Yes, sir. Yes, sir. Dr. Cavil, I told you before the show, but I'll tell everybody else. I pray that I have your patience one day. I actually listen. It's 2 things I pray for. I pray to have the strength the buttons of on the fat people shirts. And then I also pray to have your patience because you truly do have like it, even kill, um, always on message and stuff with your with what you're saying and what you're asking and stuff, and it's truly admirable, and I truly do appreciate
full of
that.
wisdom, man.
Yes.
Every time Dr. Cavil speak in one of those Twitter spaces, it's going to be full of facts and probably a nugget that you didn't know or you never even considered. So I appreciate you for spreading your wisdom with us.
Man, I received that. I appreciate it. As we were kind of coming into this, I spoke about it a little bit. I think I'm blessed to have the opportunity that my full responsibilities is, to lecture in the classroom, basically teach at the higher education level, right? And so part of what I do of what I like to think of being a master teacher in that setting, in a lyceum, is I love to have the engagement with my students. I'm not one of those professors that believe I gotta say everything. And so students learn really fast. And one, I like to try to mix up historical facts with current information. I like to, even with its data or marketing driven, we're going to use current things that they can visually see, tactile numbers, things like that. But part of that is to make sure that they engage and they understand that they have to have discussion. But they learn real fast that it's not very good to have just an open thought or just to say something in my classroom if you haven't taken the time to read, research, and support it. So I'm going to ask you why. Why do you think like that? Why do you say that? So it's a continual update in our classroom to get people, one, comfortable about giving their opinion. Because oftentimes in our community, particularly in a working space environment, we are not necessarily embellished in such a way or pushed to the front where we have become comfortable about giving our opinion. And part of that is because in a lot of arenas, it's not valued. But the biggest and quickest way to get your opinion valued is when you are substantive, when you know things, when you are comfortable about what you know, you can stand on it for whatever reason because you've done the research, you've developed a vast pocket of information that you can go to, wealth of knowledge, if you would, and you can deliver it among people. So, I'm fortunate in that manner, in that space is that, what we talk about happens to be HBCUs for the most part. And there's a lot of interest in sports. And so I do that all the time. I'm reading constantly to get information to make sure when things come up that I have it relatively in a resource tank that I can bring it up. So again, I received that. I think that, but I'm blessed in the opportunity that I live what I would like to say is my purpose every day.
I it's funny. I never thought about it that way. As far as having an opinion and then not necessarily always being valued. I was in the military, so a lot of stuff I was like, "Hey, why are we doing X, Y, Z?" And one of the best quotes, and I can't fully quote it on here, but you'll get the gist. One of my drill sergeants basically told me, "I don't know. I just hold a leg. Somebody else do and you can finish the rest." I said, "You know what? I understand what you're saying. No more questions." So that's how I say, all right. But I guess we can go ahead and get started here. Coach Eddie Robinson Jr. of Alabama State put out a tweet and said that Alabama State is the standard of HBCU athletic facilities. He posted pictures of Alabama State facilities, which are, they're beautiful. I remember I used to live in Montgomery probably 15, 20 years ago. That wasn't necessarily the case. Alabama State invested. A lot of people even then said that that's a waste of money. Nobody's going to come. Y'all not going to get the crowd. Sure enough, Alabama State is ranked number 6 in the FCS in attendance. Facilities are beautiful. That is obviously taking hold, and a lot of people have picked up on it. Alabama A&M has improved their campus. Texas Southern, where you are, just broke ground on a new $6 million strength and conditioning facility. We've been hearing about Prairie View. But then things happen, what we've seen the past 2 weeks with Coach Ed Reed and VCU, and then we've had misinformation come out, like kind of what Shannon Sharp said today. What are some of the reasons why HBCUs get knocked so hard for I guess as a whole, for I guess isolated events?
Well, I have a couple of theories on that, and I'll be quite frank when I say that the theories, these are not anything that I've necessarily proven based on research, but there are components of what I'll move from that are researched components of it that I'll provide you. But unfortunately, it's painful for me to say is I think this goes back that we as a group of people, Black people, African Americans, Africans, if you really want to talk about the diaspora, it still goes back to the fact that we've been taught over a long period of time, historically, not to really appreciate it. You know, other people talk about it simply as hate, that we hate ourselves. And I think there is a component of that, unfortunately, is very true. And oftentimes when you hate yourself, you don't trust yourself. So we have a lot of folks that are sick with that mentality. And it's easy to hate on people of color, minorities, but more specifically about African American. You know, women are probably higher on that list in some cases than Black men. And I hate to put it in that gender framework because we almost create this oddity of seeming to have to prove which one has the worst components of it. But I just hold my queens that I like to talk about high just as much I talk about my brothers and my kings. But I think a lot of this is just centuries, right, of being taught to loathe each other, not to trust each other. And when we form communities, within those communities, no matter what type of resources we have, oftentimes in a community, the love is pretty strong. Now, like any community or any group of folks, oftentimes there are disturbances that create factors that have people getting mad or frustrated. And oftentimes that is what we call the inequalities that exist, or the deprivation of resources that allow people to be able to function at a high level. But the oddity of this is oftentimes we tend to think about this more as individuals. In a very Eurocentric capitalistic system, oftentimes things are thought about the singular, you know, one, raise yourself up by your bootstraps. But undergirded in all that is really a system that supports the group process, which obviously is more Afrocentric in nature, about the family, about the community, right? About a ethnic state of people with common core values, historical frameworks, if you would. And so when those things start to put in place, it's a lead where we're going ultimately to kind of end the thought about this, that translate from individuals and communities to institutions. So we don't talk about our institutions and the value of our institutions. In fact, when we look at desegregation, because I don't like to call it integration, because when you really think about integration in its purest scientific sense, integration is when there's a transfer of information or things or parts on both sides. When you think about the desegregation of Black communities, let's be frank with that, right? Black institutions, some of the greatest minds and thinkers, athletic bodies moved into what I refer to as white spaces, Eurocentric institutions, right? And they had to deal with a whole different set of issues. Some could survive and do well. Other ones had to deal with some mental angst in terms of how they were dealt with in the environment, which is a poison. Sometimes they brought that back to the community, but then those that were left in the community didn't have the ability to navigate with the top 10. I hate to refer to it, but you've heard it just so people are familiar with the talented 10. You know, those that are doing well, they balance those that are not doing well, and you could pull people up as a collective group. So one of the problems we have is we don't really value our Black institutions. to really sum up to answer your question. And that's a troubling thing when you talk about our greatest resource, the greatest value of what has allowed us to transcend a lot of the ills of this society is through our institutions. And when you stop valuing your institutions, it becomes even more difficult as a collective to create the empowerment that is needed to see growth throughout the community, our people.
To that point, it's sort of like the old adage, white is right, and in our community, a lot of times we always assume that white is better or white is the correct way, and the way we're doing it isn't up to their standard, and so whenever we look at our institutions, HBCU institutions, we always look at them like, oh, they're substandard because they're not the white institution. And so a lot of times it's pure misinformation and it's a pure slanted bias to make it to where HBCUs are substandard. And like, the quote, a lie gets halfway around the world before the truth gets a chance to put his pants on. So whenever you do have that misinformation, that's going to spread. But whenever people come out and fight it with the truths, those truths aren't going to spread, and it's not going to get the coverage that the lie gets. And so it's an uphill battle that HBCUs, their alums, their students, people like Dr. Cavil are always going to have to fight, because they're fighting it with facts where everybody else gets to spread lies and misinformation and pass it off as fact, but their message goes further.
Absolutely. I mean, I couldn't provide a more level-headed response or framework of what I'm speaking about. You're absolutely right about us understanding, but I will say this. What you all are doing is important, is about moving head focused in the direction of truth and power, of empowering people. So you have to do it. You have a responsibility, and you all are uniquely in a position that you own that, you understand that, and you value that, right? And so it's harder for folks to be able to corrupt you all in regards to saying that, forget all that. I'm gonna do this because it makes me feel good or financially it's beneficial. Yeah. Let's be frank with that. In capitalistic society, oftentimes negative news sells.
That's true.
Right? And so if you value the dollar more than you value your own empowerment, your people's empowerment, or your own truth, then it's easy to get off your square, as they talk about, right? Yeah. It's easy to move off that guiding light. So to your point, I agree. That's a lot of the problem, but that's one thing that I've been blessed with, is that I'm focused. And I've been in a position where proximity to whiteness is not anything I seek, right? And I've done so much studying that I understand why there may be a difference. Deprivation of resources is plain as can see if you take your time just to read and do your homework. It doesn't take long to understand why some institutions don't have the resources as others, right? When you've been stripped. And we found out now that it's in so many different ways. One time we looked at it historically, and we understood that it was from, athletics, with, African Americans leaving communities that at one time went to black spaces, mainly what we refer to as historically black colleges, moving into white spaces, what I refer to as historically white colleges and universities, right? And those resources went with them. We've seen it with redlining when you talk about the financing of housing, right? And so we've seen it over and over in different capacities about how do you build wealth, the educational wealth gap, right? The resources for these segregated high schools. Now you had power where you had a community and some of the best intellectual think tanks that were teaching at these institutions, so they were able to overcome it. What people don't even realize oftentimes, it was the education of segregated high schools, K through 12, that broke the black segregationists through the legal system. Those folks that did that, right, came from black high schools, historically black colleges. They the one that fought that battle, right? And they were the ones supposedly with this inferior education. So we have to be careful about folks telling us that the value of anything just has to be with dollars. Now, we're not fools, and we understand that you need resources, but we can't be caught up with everything has to be measured by what dollars and cents, because we already know that those resources are contained by those individuals, because the system, as you've seen with the study that talks about the billions of dollars that have been displaced from historically Black colleges and institutions, right? And we know that that's not an accident, right? We knew this. Now, we may not have done and put pen to paper for the dollars, which is good to see when you start understanding just how much it is, and it becomes egregious when it's billions of dollars, right? Not just millions, but billions of dollars,
right?
From these institutions. So, you know, you think about what you could do with millions of dollars and what those resources would do to the community, even from a private institution. If we have more folks that are going to public institutions that are better equipped, then when they are financially well off, right, and are not first generation folks that are trying to accumulate some level of wealth, it's easier for them now to be philanthropic, maybe give back to a Black institution that's private that they see the value in because they see it for themselves, right? Yeah. Which will help Bethune-Cookman. But to get back to one of the platforms you talked about from an athletic framework, I would have to agree in a lot of ways that Alabama State has become what many people see as the standard, right? And I'm careful about using those words like that, because now it seems like you're trying to separate yourself, which in a Eurocentric model is extremely important. What I like to say is from an Afrocentric model that, you know, Alabama State has been able to create some value in their institution that is visibly different than other institutions. So they were able to navigate the space of state and, in some degree, federal funding that allowed them to allocate funds that I'm sure that they were owed over a period of time, and they were able to navigate this space maybe a little better than some other state institutions, namely in Mississippi or in Louisiana, where you all reside and do a lot of your background in terms of the cultural experience that is unique to that state and people that look like you. The next in line in a lot of ways is Texas. But as you notice these things, you know, a lot of that is appropriation for equity because other institutions have gotten it first and so fast and built up that these are owed to us. But you also have to give some credit to the leadership there. You know, let me not shy away from that. When you have significant, long-lasting leadership, you know, under the current president, and you have to give some love to past presidents, because oftentimes these things start in one president and it's building another one, and so the current president would get more advantage or support and looking as if they did it, but they maintained and they carried through, which is important. You also have to give some respect to the board that were fought and allowed to make sure these things happen. But specifically also VP of Intercollegiate Athletics or the athletic director, right? Miss Williams that was there before the current athletic director in terms of his steel, in terms of what he gets done there. They were able to navigate that space and be able to talk to folks and provide value of why these things need to do. So you got the stadium, which is one of the largest and newest ones out there. Very similar to Prairie View, obviously a little larger than that. And it delivered in terms of how they were able to support it. The Acadome has been renovated. Obviously, they have their own stadium track field, which is nice when you can separate it. Which is similar to what you see a lot at Prairie View. And a lot of that was due to resources that folks had not put in that institution, but to some degree, people fighting for it and the state recognizing that it needs to be done, and so it gets done. So those are the things that end up being pretty important to me when I think about what that means when we look at that. And that's the current VP of Athletics, Dr. Jason Cavil. In terms of what he's been able to do in creating an environment and understanding his craft in such a way that allows him to create that value.
So I know a lot of you spoke on some the underfunding and the lack of resources HBCUs typically have. And in my opinion, that makes the administration of those institutions almost, I'm not going to say better, but I'm going to say they're more efficient because they're able to still, succeed at a high level with less resources. And especially whenever you look at these athletic departments with budgets that are a 10th or, a 20th of what some of these bigger institutions have, but yet they're still able to compete at a D1 level with those other schools. Can you speak a little bit to the obstacles that are kind of unique to HBCUs in a sense, other than the funding, other than lack of funding, and kind of how these 8 administrations are able to overcome some of those obstacles?
Well, yeah, certainly. In a lot of ways, it almost always comes back to resources.
Oh yeah.
So it's a challenge, but as I tell my students, and so I have to do it too, because I tell them that they can't just say money or resources, that they have to really dig down a little deeper. So resources allow you to get manpower. So as you're talking about, one of the dilemmas that you have at smaller schools, not just HBCUs, but mid-major, particularly what some people call low major in a basketball reference at the Division I level, but those that are limited resources, is some of the terminology you hear them say, is that they don't have the manpower, the people really to diversify athletic departments, academic departments, leadership departments, administrative departments, right? And so each time that you lack manpower, that means you're either asking folks to do another job, right? And let's think about that. It's hard enough to be sufficient in one job. You talked about it earlier. Have you had somebody that had 2 high-level jobs? Now, usually that isn't the case, and the reason it usually doesn't happen because people can't do both jobs well. Now, in this case, it's a little different because it's at least the off season, if you will, right? So that makes a little bit of sense. I want to make sure I put that out there, but it gives us a reference point. So if I'm asking an individual to do 2 jobs, it shouldn't surprise you if a couple of things may fall by the wayside because they're trying to do 2 things, right? Or 3 things in terms of the job. So that manpower and resource makes it real challenging. So even if we go back, as you talk about Bethune-Cookman, some of the issues you have are multi-layered. And one of the things we get in this environment we are, right, this United States, in terms of the country we live in, is the fact that we often like to simplify things to one thing. Let me just point out this one thing. This is the reason why. But in reality, if you think about it, that's rarely the case. Usually it's multiplicative effects that create the environment that happens, whether it's positive or negative, right? As I said, when you talk about what's so good about Alabama State, their facilities, Texas Southern Prairie View, right? Alabama A&M in terms of basketball arena, what they continue to do. And some other institutions have done some stuff, even in the MEAC and things of that nature, right? But a lot of that is overcoming the ability to develop all those resources. But when you look at Bethune-Cookman, the fact that they don't have the manpower. Remember, one of the things they had to do is they were trying to right side the finances. They had to furlough people and let people go. That's not always you doing that because you were top heavy. Often the times you did that because you just financially had to change the state of affair to level set things, right? It doesn't mean you don't need folks. And at some point, hopefully you get to a point where you can hire them back. But the challenge about that is when you hire them back, oftentimes you have to hire new people and they don't have the history, right? And when I say history, I'm not just talking about historical artifacts, but I'm also talking about knowledge-based
experience,
right? The experience, exactly, that comes with them. So those are some of the things that make it challenging when you talk about HBCUs and what they lack for not having these resources that are tied to money, but are directly or indirectly making it challenging. And so that's probably the biggest thing that I would talk about is the manpower.
The first thing that comes to mind when you say that to me is the situation with FAMU earlier this year when we saw all those academically ineligible players because they have one person trying to be a student advisor to multiple sports teams. So that's a great point. I think you hit it right on the head with that one, Doc.
Yes, sir. Appreciate it. So another thing when we talk about these resources, now I'll let you jump in and ask a question. I apologize.
Oh, no problem.
But for example, when you look at Prairie View, because I wanted to break this down, because y'all said you want some facts, we want to do some numbers, and we don't get a chance to talk about this. So this is needed information, and I know for some folks it's easier to get out there and talk about all this other stuff. But since you had me and we're gonna take this deeper dive, we'll try to make it fun, at least interesting. But Prairie View, for example, in 2019, if you would, they put out their fiscal year report, and so they had $236 million in total revenue. Let's break it down so people understand where revenue comes from and the percentage of that revenue, because a lot of folks just think you got millions of dollars, where does this money go, and what do you spend it on, and things of that nature. Well, 25, this is a public institution, as y'all know, and 25% of the revenue, 236 million, right, come from state appropriation. The legislation of the state of Texas provides $59 million. Well, you say, man, that's a lot of money. But when you compare it to other institutions, it's on the lower end in the state. Yeah. Exactly, it's not. And that's a challenging too, because people will hear $59 million, is a lot of money, but it costs a lot of money to run an institution. And when you compare what another institution to get, oftentimes similar size, they still get less. And when you create the rules of why you divvy out money, you can create rules that seems like you're doing it in a fair way, but you skew the rules in such a way that you get all the advantage of it. So, well, we're going to give more money to an institution that's doing more research. Well, the institution had all the benefits up front in a lot of ways. Yeah. So obviously they're doing more research. So what you do, you just come back and you create rules that make it like you're not doing anything unfair, but you're advantaging a program that already had the advantage. So 25%, when you talk $59 million, that's only 29% of the budget in terms of revenue that comes from the state. 19%, right, comes from tuition and fees. So the more students you have, the more tuition and fees you have, right? And you set these percentages in a way. So if you think about that, almost half of Prairie View's budget, right under 50%, 44%, right? Or state appropriations, what comes from the legislator, and tuition and fees. 14% come from contracts and grants that you get applying with your faculty, grants from federal grants, local grants, any of those type of grants, and contracts you get for doing things for folks. You get about 14% of your budget. 13% of contracts and grants. One is what you call operating grants, things that you need literally to operate. Then you have a section that's called non-operating. So contracts and grants total is 27%. They break it down in two areas. Then you have 12% available university funds, AUF. That's funds that you can basically spend in a lot of different areas. So those are funds that are available to do things outside of that, are not allocated for specific things in the budget line, right? 4% federal appropriation, right? And so each of these institutions get federal funds. It's only 4%. Think about it. 4%. $9 million. But if I told you Prairie View gets $9 million from the government, you'd be like, wow, that's a lot of money. Not when you compare that it's only 4% of a $236 million budget, 1% from gifts, right? Outside sources. And I'll quickly say this, as question comes up, people talk about, well, African Americans, blacks have a low giving rate, but if you really compare it to other institutions, their giving rate is the same or higher. And if you look at it, the African Americans or blacks that give to historically white institutions, African Americans give at a higher percentage than those at historically white institutions. Yes, but all we get is that y'all get 3%. It's a low rate, so nobody has the comparison. Nobody does the comparison. So you just hear 1%, you say, oh, that's low. But what is it low compared to? As you talked about, how do you have these discussions in the classroom? You bring up facts to make stuff level so folks can get some real framework of what this talks about. Well, this school does this, but what does the other school do? Not to compare, because that is a problem in itself if you're always comparing, but at least the level set to give you some understanding what took place. 2% from other income, 2% from investment income, meaning they invest in maybe the stock market and other stuff, and they get money back yearly on that investment. That's 2%. You got places like Harvard that have significant investment because they have the resources to invest. They can split and invest some in risky areas, some and not. But they have such a large portfolio that they get a higher percentage back on their investment because they've been doing it longer. They have more expense in it. You have what you call auxiliary operations, which gets in to athletics, bands, and other things about auxiliary of how you operate that. That's 18 million. Again, that includes research, which is 8%. But I want you to say this last thing before I close that part up. It's 236 million in revenue, and you're like, man, that's a lot of money. You do everything, but their expenses is 235 million. So they spend almost every dollar they get in. Well, people would say, how do you do that? But that's not necessarily a bad thing. You must remember that this is a non-profit organization. Right. So you're supposed to basically spend everything you get in. It is operated like a business, which some people would have some concern in education, period. But a lot of parts of it that, yes, operates, but because it's non-profit, oftentimes we forget that it does not have a business platform. And that's what gets a lot of the NCAA and these Power 5 schools in trouble now, because people see all the revenue that they're getting and they use the business model with television to help them get the money. And people are saying, well, if y'all nonprofit, you can't call these athletes, right, in such a way where we say, no, they can't have revenue. We just got the name, image, and likeness, which was good, but they won't pay them, right? Because they say they're amateurs. Well, a lot of that is based on the fact that their model, and people are arguing, is like, no, you can't have this model where everybody generates and everybody gets this money, but the folks that earn it don't get a penny. And that's what level sets this versus when we think about a nonprofit entity.
Yeah.
Now, Dr. Cavil, I had to laugh earlier when you got ready to start. David said, nah, I keep talking, doctor. I ain't about to ask you nothing. So, as always, wealth of knowledge, and we absorbing it all. And Doc, you kind of touched on a lot of the questions we had. One thing, and you kind of touched the misconception about athletic budgets and school budgets, because a lot of people. One thing that I do know, I heard a lot with Jackson State when Deion was leaving, and some of that misinformation was getting out there. Jackson State made so much in athletic ticket sales and stuff, and then they were like, "Why is the athletic department giving back to giving money to the school? The school's stealing money from the athletic department."
Well, we heard it in the Bethune thing also. They made what 800,000, 700,000 for playing the University of Miami, and some of the protesters and players were asking, "Well, where's our money for that game?" Not realizing that it doesn't go strictly back to the football team; it goes into the athletic budget as a whole, and that happens at a lot of institutions, not just FCS. That happens at every school that plays money games. That money goes back into the general budget for the athletic department so they could pay for travel for all these non-revenue generating sports such as women's basketball, soccer, baseball, and all those kind of sports. It's not just the HBCUs. It's not just with the Jackson State and Bethune situation. It happens everywhere, but it only gets pointed back at HBCUs like where they're stealing money from the athletic department.
Not just that.
Let me add on to that, because that is important, that we really need to drill down on that. People fail to realize is, yes, you hear that Miami is paying them this money, but nobody talks about the fact is, how did they get there in the first place? How did they get to Miami?
Travel.
Right? You think they travel for free?
Nah.
Didn't they feed them? They had to buy equipment and all that stuff. What people don't realize is to get the season started with practice, put them in, fall camp and all that kind of stuff, somebody has to pay that money. Because there's no television money, it's not like the athletic department starts with revenue in their budget. They haven't sold a ticket. So where's the revenue? Revenue comes from the school. The school up fronts it. So oftentimes that money that you're talking about, the reason it not only goes back to the general fund, part of it is paying back.
Yeah.
Bingo.
Money that they borrowed. And people just conveniently just slip over that because they forget the whole thing. All they hear is like, oh man, they got $700. No. The university upfronted the money for athletics to operate the year. What happens over the year period of time when they get this money, all they do is basically pay it back. So essentially, the athletic department took out a loan.
Yeah,
Let's make it
from
plain.
the university. Yeah,
from the university. And just like when you spend on your credit card, what happens?
You got to pay it back. You got to pay that bill back.
Pay it back if you want to. They're gonna come get you.
Yep. And not to mention when people say the money should stay in the in the football team's budget and things of that nature. My question would be, you don't want the men's basketball, women's basketball team, you don't want them to have a season? Because how else are they going to travel to their conference games and all those things unless they have that money in the budget? Because like you said, you got to travel, you got to house them, you got to feed them on all these road trips, non-conference and conference. So that's the only way. That money's got to come from somewhere. And until those other sports start generating their own revenue, which is not going to happen because it doesn't happen in any program, in any institution in the country. It's not going to happen. Unless you're Duke basketball, Kansas basketball, one of those blue blood premier programs, you're not going to generate revenue in those sports. Mm-hmm. So every program in the country does the same thing.
Right. That's why you hear about them canceling all these Title IX sports, trying to blame it on Title IX, which is another false quote. Mm-hmm. But a lot of it is because it doesn't generate revenue. Two things are the biggest things that generate revenue for institutions: ticket sales, but the real money driving thing is television revenue.
Yep.
Do you see Waller Polo on television? Really? Nope. Not very often, which means the contracts that the interests are not there, so you don't see it on television. Mean the networks are not going to pay a conference, if you would, for that money. So that's a lot of it. Is like a lot of the money that you see, even from the Power Five, it's not just coming from the fact that they are able to get a lot of money. Most of that money is actually coming from television.
Yep. Speaking of television, go ahead, Pooh.
No, I was going to ask. It's two things. I think a big problem that people have, especially looking at budget, a lot of times because of the way we've been conditioned, a lot of times we look at HBCU sports with historically white college eyes, the way we've understood sports, because, and we talked about this before, I never knew FCS playoffs, the format and the way it's set up was completely different from FBS playoffs. And again, I understand that FCS is an all HBCU, but because it falls under NCAA, you're pretty much playing for a playoff. You're paying for your playoffs to host a playoff game or to participate,
which in itself puts some certain institutions at a disadvantage.
Exactly. Also, with FBS, because the way it's set up, it is not under NCAA. They are pretty much funded by sponsorships and different things like that. So it is completely different. It benefits you to make the FBS playoffs, to make money for your school, to make money for your conference. But that's neither here and there. But it goes back to everything we're saying.
That's important though.
Yeah.
That revelation that you talk about, you didn't know. And you fussing at folks saying, "Hey man, why y'all go to the playoffs?" And somebody said, "No, it don't make sense to go to playoffs." You be like, "What you mean? I mean, you do all this make money." Then when you finally break it down, you be like, "Oh man, this don't make no sense." Why
I'd rather go get my $1 million for playing in the Celebration Bowl than have to go play in the playoffs.
Especially if you have the option.
Exactly.
The historic white colleges don't have a Celebration Bowl. They don't have the option.
Exactly.
So obviously, the thing that they're going to at least try to chase for something, they got to reward the students to do something, so they go to the playoffs. But if they had their choices, their ADs and presidents are not dumb. If they had their choices to make money versus not make money, they would do it. The other thing that's important, though, when we get in there is when we talk about the NCAA, is like, it's not just the NCAA. It's not this NCAA that makes these decisions. The NCAA is made up of the membership. But the question that we also need to ask ourselves is who operates, who has the most power within the NCAA. And it makes sense, especially in this country. Usually those that have the most resources and money have the power.
Yeah, I was just about to ask how many.
They had the voting power. So they created the rules in such a way. They're the ones who threatened the NCAA that we're going to leave all together unless you let us have football. Now, they'll give you some of the resources because we don't want y'all get mad too much. So we give you the playoffs. But the reason the playoffs are set in the way is because it had to be set up in such a way that at least was able to operate enough that it didn't take so much money away from the Power Five. So they get some resources. They're not going to put up a system that would generate revenue because that revenue would go away from the Power Five that are getting it from the tournament or what now is the college football playoffs. They want all those resources. They do it in basketball. Yep. Basketball, yes, we'll make it so it seems fair. Everybody gets one bid, right?
Bingo, right there.
Everybody get big power get multiple bids, and they set it up in such a way the further you go in the tournament until you get the Final Four, you get extra money. So even the basketball tournament, not only do they get more teams proceed further in the tournament, so they get those resources. When they go bring these elaborate facilities, go and recruit folks with these big old toys, and then they come back and say, hey, man, this is about who's the best. This is not whatever. And you say, hey, man, y'all just work harder and do all this. He's like, man, y'all must think I'm crazy. I read the rules. I see what you're doing. You set up a system that is beneficial to you, and then you get mad with anybody that challenges it.
Then they expand the field to 90 teams. Yet what they didn't do is say, okay, we're gonna give every league 2 automatic bids. Whoever wins the regular season or whoever wins the conference tournament. They didn't do that, did they? No, that makes too much sense. You know, and that would be too equitable for everyone. So what they're gonna do is they're just gonna have more 5 and 8 teams that in their conference, you know, or whatever 500 teams in their conference make the tournament instead of teams who lost 2 games in their conference at a lower level. But my question was gonna be how many, because obviously we know. Well, I don't know. Obviously, I don't know if a lot of people know this, but presidents and ADs sit on a lot of these competition boards and, you know, boards and stuff like that for the NCAA. Are there any HBCUs that have representation on these boards?
Every so often they have one.
I got you. So it has happened.
Yeah, so you have some, but it's like one person.
Yeah.
But even other FCS conferences may have 1-2 people. Most of the folks that sit on the board at the Division I are from the Power Five. Yeah. So they even have the voting block. So you might have a committee, let's say, of 11 folks. 8, 9 of those folks going to be from the Power Five institutions or the FBS level. 1 or 2 will be from FCS. They might put 1 for Division II, or they might just all be Division I, depending on the committee or whatever. Maybe all Division I, but when you look and say, all right, let me look at each of these schools, and you start looking at it, you be like, hold on. 5 of these folks happen to be in these schools that are members of these Power 5 institutions.
And we
but only one of them is from
the
G5. 2 of them from G5, but only 1 of them are from the mid-major, and 1 of them. So anything you bring up to try to change the rules, you'll be like, nope, we don't want that. Never mind. We vote that down.
Yep, that makes sense. Right. Like our boy David says, the golden rule is the one with the gold makes the rules.
That's it. Yep. That's it. That old adage. Very true. And so that's what you see. So it plays out on every level. And that's where it comes back when we talk about the deprivation of resources. That's what we meant by that. Is when they're systematically, purposely set up to alleviate and withhold resources from certain institutions. In this case, what we see evidence of that it happens to be, and I shouldn't say happens to be, it is purposely historically black college university more than it is of the other.
All right. You mentioned previously TV contracts is the way to go. Well, not necessarily the way to, but that's where the biggest, you know, the second part of that how big is the HBCU Go deal to in you know to help like the SWAC and stuff?
It's huge. It's huge. It has the chance to literally change the game, level the playing field to some degree. Obviously, you're not going to really catch up with the Power Fives, but the G5s becomes reality. One of the things that I looked at based on my calculations, what I've heard Commissioner Dr. Charles McCullen talking about, I mean, depending on these other resources, they'll renegotiate their contracts too, so it could change. But based on the deal that was currently structured and understanding the money associated with it, I've seen, read, whatever, that the distribution over a period of time is going to be not only the larger the largest in terms of FCS, but it becomes larger than the bottom three members of the FBS, the G5 type of conference institution. So you see these institutions are at least able to operate to some degree at the FBS level. Imagine what it looks like when a FCS conference has the budget of money to distribute to its institution to do that. So now you can reduce some degree some of the resources that you have coming out from your auxiliary funds we talked about earlier, right? So you can even keep them there and expand your budget, or you can take some of those things out and do more creative things with. Now you have this money that comes in there. So you talk about facilities. It allows you, one, to maintain the facilities, which is important, right? To keep them up. And then it allows you to enhance the facilities, putting new things in there that helps maybe the fan experience, which ultimately could help in terms of resources coming into the institution in terms of seating arrangements, ticket sales, marketing, and things of that nature that you can do with these resources, right? It helps in that. And then obviously you have resources that allow you maybe to build new projects. And so when you look at those three different areas, the ability to maintain, right, what you have, to expand what you have, and literally build new things, that should tell you pretty significantly the type of resources and what the HBCU goal can help provide.
You said build new things. I'm glad you said that. Tennessee State recently went to their senator, went to the state government because their enrollment had grown so much that they were trying to build new housing for students. When they got there, they were met with not only resistance, but they were met with criticism. Why are y'all allowing so many students to come? The president argued basically that, hey, it's been a renaissance in HBCUs. More students are, and with the pandemic, more students are coming back home, and they're choosing to come to, Tennessee State. The senators then argued, why aren't they going to Tennessee? Well, they just choose to go to, black students. Are you asking? And I think it was kind of question. Are you asking why are black students choose to go to a HBCU? And I bring that up because this isn't an isolated incident.
Correct.
North Carolina A&T.
Yep, I was just about to bring them up.
Yeah,
$2 million fine.
They were fined $2 million for basically saying they were over-enrolling students.
You have too many out-of-state students.
Out-of-state students. There you go. I'm sorry. When you see things like that, we talk about building this money that can come from the HBCU Go deal. And then, as something you mentioned earlier, there's approximately 18 HBCUs that is owed approximately, and they said this is adjusted with inflation, $12.8 billion. That's billion with a B, everybody that's out there.
Yeah, I mean, the largest one was one of the institutions talked about, A&T, which $2.7 billion. FAMU was right under $2 billion, 1.9. Tennessee State at $1.9 billion, and they just asked for $400 million, and they wouldn't even give them all of that. They gave them $2 billion, right? And the money they gave them was just to bring up again the facility. It was deferred maintenance, meaning the buildings were literally falling apart. They were asking for infrastructure stuff. That's the other thing. Some folks are like, they got $200 million, they need to do something with it. It can't even go to the students in terms of scholarship if they wanted to. COVID money from the federal government, they did that part. And I certainly understand students that say they don't want debt, but a lot of that is out of the control in terms of what's going on there, what that looks like. You don't have the investment money. You have African Americans that earn a penny on the dollar, and then you're going to ask them to give it back in their first generation. So that wealth gap that you're talking about all starts to mingle and churn. But yes, to your point, as I said, the system is set up in such a way that doesn't benefit HBCUs. And then you double down with literally racist individuals, whether they try to cover it up in different things and ask these questions, or set up a system that allows them to create racist policies if they have racist bone or not. The policies themselves create deprivation. That is a racist framework of thinking when you do that. And I know that's challenging for some folks because they think we over some of that. Well, I hate to break it to you, it still exists. So yes, not only were they talking about Tennessee, which is challenging because Tennessee in a lot of ways, unless you are special admit for an athlete that is going to allow them to generate revenue on the field, they won't let you in the institution unless you make certain scores, right? Mm-hmm. So that's the thing. But a lot of it, they were talking about them not even going to the other regional, historically white college universities.
Middle Tennessee State and schools of that nature.
Correct. Tennessee Tech. Why they wouldn't prefer to go there? Which, we don't even have to entertain that. We know what that's about. But the fact that you have to understand that the president, Glover, literally had to answer that question, which tells you a lot about the challenge of presidents and chancellors at HBCUs, about the fact that they even have to entertain the foolishness of that nature. It's not about educating students. It's about us deciding where you're going to educate, how many you're going to educate, and we're going to question everything about what you're doing and then we're still not going to give you the appropriate funds that you need, other than just enough to allow you to be able to somewhat sustain, not really thrive, but sustain. But what's sad about this, think about how great this country would be, which I know is a challenge for a lot of people to understand, if the appropriate resources there. All that capital and money actually goes back in the system. All you're doing is developing folks that are going to come out and be gainfully employed in areas where they can make a decent living, and they're going to spend whether it's housing, money, things.
Pay more in taxes.
Yeah, they're just going to pay more taxes. So they're going to feed back in the system. So you're actually depriving the system of generating more wealth, which is just crazy. You go to A&T, as you said, they were punished. What's sad about North Carolina A&T is not the fact that they had the rules on the books, but they don't even apply it the same.
Right.
University of North Carolina doesn't have the same rule.
Mm-hmm.
So that's when I start saying that we need to understand before we go so hard on HBCU black institutions, and not to say that we can't question anything, but we really, again, need to do our homework, so we put it on the table, so we're asking the appropriate questions, and we need to make sure we're not only asking the president, chancellor of these institutions, not only answering their board, but we need to be answering the legislator, because understand, as you said earlier, hopefully you're voting, but even if you're voting, you're going to pay your taxes or they're going to put you to jail. So that's your money. That they're making a decision, so they're taking your money. So you get double dip. They're taking your money and not even supporting institutions that you came to be associated with.
And to your point, Grambling State, which is school closest to me, they recently hired a former politician as their president of their university, and one of the first things he did was try to make Grambling State a land grant institution, and legislator died. It died in legislation. The bill died in legislation.
They were like, "No, we good. Don't worry about it."
Yeah, exactly. So even whenever you as an HBCU try to play the game their way, and bring in someone who's familiar with the tactics and how it works, they still have all the power, and they still can say, "Nah, we good." You know what I mean? And so
no
matter how good you try to play their game, they're still going to be better at it than you.
Right. And so that's one of the reasons I go back to the fact that we need to put our head down and do our work and be excited for what we have. We need to celebrate us. We need to celebrate the fact that it is a wonderful experience that Prairie View plays Grambling in the State Fair Classic. We need to be able to enjoy all the things that are surrounded that make that game rich. We need to be able to celebrate the SWAC championship game and the fact that we can put 30, 40, 50 people in there and enjoy that experience. We don't have to compare it to other things. There's sometimes with measurables you do that and we supersede other ones, but we need to not only compare it for the fact that we want to show somebody, we need to compare it for the fact that we can celebrate. We can literally celebrate the Celebration Bowl for the fact that it features a SWAC versus MEAC. It is a championship event in regards to what it looks like. It starts the bowl season with a championship as it ends with the CFP championship. So if we got a better understanding and celebrate that and support it in such a way, it becomes easier to ask for even more support. which creates a tsunami effect in a lot of ways to continue to keep things going. So that's what I always tell everybody, and why, as you talked about earlier, why it's easy for me to have a level set, because I don't get mad. I've studied, I understand what's going on, and I'm happy in terms of celebrating this great weekend that will come up this weekend, I should say, with the rivalry game between Prairie View and Texas Southern. It's going to be a lot of black excellence in that event, right? A lot of people that celebrate these institutions, that are proud of these institutions, that are going to get a chance to see it play out on the court between the men's and women's thing, and they're going to go in that with a lot of support for their team and a lot of ribbing against each other. But mostly when they come out of there, they're going to come out and celebrate each other and go have some fun. They might rib each other a little bit about who gets to sip the champagne and smoke a cigar, talking about the victory dance, right? But outside of that, it's going to be, in a lot of ways, a great deal of love in terms of culture and community that is unique to any other event. That's great. We need to be not only okay, but we need to be functionally excited and literate about understanding the power of that state.
Yeah.
Yep. Dr. Cavil, you said a trigger word: land grant. Land grant institution, land grant school. We always hear this, and I know we talked about. I know Tennessee State. That's one way they've been able to kind of fight, complete, and fight for money or fight for benefits and get ahead. What exactly is a land grant school? And not necessarily the definition, the denotation, I guess you could say, but what is something, and how does that benefit our HBCUs?
Well, land grant is basically legislative clause, an act. It was called the Moral Act, named after the person that basically founded it. And there were schools that were founded under this designation. The first act was in 1862, and the next one was about 30 years later in 1890, if you would. The first one was signed under Abraham Lincoln. Think about that, which was to fund education. That's when this country saw education as a value and a growth and wanted more education. Facts. Now, I will say this: a lot of the education was to create a working class, so we can debate how valued that is. But in terms of the context of what you're asking, it's important to understand that that's what it is. It's a act that talked about land grant, and these mission of these colleges. They were basically special mission, almost like HBCU in itself was a special mission. The Land Grant Act and those schools that were designated under that was special mission, which happened to be both some historically black college and some what I refer to again as historically white college, to create a level nomenclature in the name to talk about the leveling of it. That's why I don't use the other terminology out there. I want to create equity. So it's important for those they want to know why I use historically white colleges, is so to put them in a place where these two institutions are level set, not only in terms of how we need to think, but also in terms of how we use nomenclature names, if you would, to determine that. But back to your land grant, it's basically about agriculture, science, sometimes military science. That's why you saw HBCUs, the land grant, have these Army ROTC programs, Navy ROTC programs, if you would. Because they had the military science component on it and engineering, right? And so you hear it with these ag research A&T. At one time, Tennessee State, right, was technically, they took that technical institute part off of it and just went for Tennessee State for short off, but it still has that land grant mission. Prairie View A&M, agriculture mechanical. Alabama A&M, agriculture mechanical, right? FAMU, agriculture and mechanical. So a lot of these programs have engineering programs in it, have some type of science, ag science or agriculture, if you would. And again, military, high-end sciences, which also means in a lot of ways it gives you a position where you can get some of these grant monies that we talked about earlier. Shout out to Howard University. They got that $90 million grant that was out there, which is huge, right? So you hear about the R2 designation and need several of these HBCU institutions that are talking about getting R1. That's for getting more research dollars allocation so people can understand the importance of it. There are 11 institutions that are listed at R2. 5 of them are in the SWAC, Southwestern Athletic Conference, which is significant when you think about it. Three of them, if you would, or two of them in the Mid-Eastern Athletic Conference, Tennessee State outside of it, North Carolina A&T outside of it, and then one in terms of a private school that operates at the Division II level in the SIAC, which is a Clark Atlanta University, which people don't understand why I'm always excited and pushing Clark Atlanta University, because the merger of those institutions, when they come together with Clark College and Atlanta University, to the richness of Clark Atlanta University and the research, what they put on there in the Atlanta city, metropolitan city, is huge. And so that's why I get excited. And certainly when I heard the SWAC taking a baseball tournament to Atlanta was another indication about understanding the resources associated and importance of that. Because again, we talk about these ag schools that are in these rural areas. One of the ways that you're able to recruit to these schools is to go to these larger metropolitan area where a lot of us live, right? When I say us, African-American Black people, right? Out of the diaspora. So that's another reason why I always talk about Tennessee State, about understanding the value about being able to get into some of these areas. And the SWAC has the benefit of basically having two schools the way Houston has grown out. Certainly Houston, in terms of Texas Southern, right there in the middle, but Prairie View's, extension in less than an hour away. It creates an environment where you have these institutions, even Jack State, in terms of Jackson, maybe not a large metropolitan that we think about Atlanta, Dallas, or Houston, but still in terms of that state significant in size. Baton Rouge with Southern significant in terms of the size. It's important when you look and understand what that magnitude is. So that's where you get land grant and really what it talks about in terms of understanding the location, the type of institution, and the money associated with being a land grant institution.
Yeah.
All right. Dr. Cavil, as always, you didn't learn, as my grandmama used to say, you didn't learn me something today.
Yes, sir. It's always great to talk to you, Doc.
My pleasure. I appreciate you inviting me on. Hopefully, I added some value to the show.
Always added that. We didn't triple it value. We might can sell this for. No, just kidding. But Dr. Cavil, we try to a lot of times, because what we've heard, especially lately, all people have heard are the problems. The problems. This is what's wrong. This is what's wrong. We've kind of talked about ways that, things that are needed to help HBCUs get ahead. As individuals and people listening and stuff, what are some of the best ways to, I guess, help?
Be part of the solution. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, no doubt. Part of being the solution is thinking solution mindset, solution oriented. So I'm glad that you asked this question. This is a perfect way to end it. And part of that is to support your HBCU. And so how do you support? One of that is direct financial money, whatever resource level you have. Don't think any is too small.
Correct.
Which is providing, again, resources, direct money into the institution. Sometimes that is in terms of leaving insurance policies, home policies if you have it. So any way that you can bequeath things to the university also creates value to the institution in some period of time. And then it's about sending your kids. What other way can you support value is, we talked about resources in terms of tuition and fees. Part of it is about enrollment. So sending your students there is extremely important, whether it's your kids, your siblings, right? Cousins, folks in the neighborhood, getting them to go there. Obviously, it's important also to provide service to the institution, right? And now this can't be service that you say they need. It needs to be service in terms of working with the institution, not just saying that this is what they need and this is what I'm gonna do. No, it needs to be in partnership in regards to the service that needs there. So those are some ways that you want to support the institution. The other thing that is important, as you talked about in regards to understanding the value institution, HBCUs is responsible for the middle class to upper middle class of Blacks, African Americans, and stabilizing this country with that middle class, right? You can see the direct quantitative evidence of what HBCUs provide. And then if you want to get particularly in terms of majors, you've seen these data points out there that talk about the number of teachers, talk about engineers, doctors, right, lawyers, those that earn PhDs. A large percent of those African Americans, blacks in there is when you talk about folks that are able to attain that level of education, right? A lot in terms of 60% or more have their beginnings in terms of the undergraduate degree at HBCU. Yeah. So that is significant when you talk about the value of what HBCUs do, that it literally changed this country to more productive and just country. And just about all the rights that we see different groups that have been able to engender, a lot of that comes directly for the push for civil rights, which were certainly on the backs and pushed and challenged by African American black folks. So even the liberties, when we talk about, if you hear this country, when it talks about the liberties, it's a direct influence in terms of African Americans, even when you talk about those that fought for freedom for everybody that ultimately led to civil rights in terms of the Civil War. That is a bedrock to this country when you look at the foundation of this country in regards to what we understand it to be today. So there, without a doubt, and much of that input is on historically black college and university.
Yes, sir. Well said, Doc.
Hey, we can't even say nothing now. Let's go ahead and end it. Doc, again, as always, truly appreciate it. Look forward to talking to you again. Look forward to seeing you in Media Day.
Oh yeah, we'll
if
be
not
there.
before.
Look forward
if
to
not
it.
Before.
Again,
yes,
y'all
sir.
Keep up the great work.
Yes, sir.
Great work, I should say. I'm really excited and powerful what y'all do. And again, I appreciate the opportunity and continue the great work. And I hope I, again, provided some value and substance to the show.
Yes, sir.
Definitely.
Always,
Definitely.
Doc. Appreciate you.
Ladies and gentlemen, we'll be wrapping up. We'll be back next week. I don't know what day. I don't know if we're gonna come on Monday again or we just gonna stick to Wednesday for 9.
Just subscribe to the channel so you'll know when we go live. How about that?
I tell you what, we do have some changes coming. So we'll be back. And like that, we out.